Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. The US strike on nuclear facilities in Iran over the weekend was a very significant escalation of the conflict in the Middle East. So what happens now and what does it mean for Australia when our own security pact with the US is under review? Michael Shoebridge is the founder and director of defence and security think tank Strategic Analysis Australia. He was previously the director of Defence Strategy and National Security Program at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute in Canberra. Prior to that, he held a senior role within Australia's intelligence agencies. Michael Shoebridge, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Great to talk with you, Sean.
Is the world a more dangerous place today than a week ago?
No, but I think it's a more fragmented place, and any idea that the rules-based global order is still in place and it's not more naked national power, I think anyone that's still thinking that is making a mistake. It's a world dominated by naked national power.
Why did the US take this action?
Well, we've heard for decades now from various US presidents and other world leaders that the Iranian regime having nuclear weapons was unacceptable and unthinkable. But at the same time, Iran has persisted in doing something that can only be explained by wanting nuclear weapons. And it had got to the point where the IAEA, shortly before the Israeli strikes on Iran, had said not only was Iran in breach of all of its verification and monitoring obligations, but it had enough enriched uranium for 9 nuclear weapons.
So it's easy to blame, I'm not sure that's the right word, but be critical of Donald Trump's actions. But he's done something which previous incumbents in that job didn't want to do. So, I mean, there's kind of a lot more to the story than saying, oh, Donald Trump's trigger happy.
Well, yes, and I think he was personally conflicted about making this decision. We all know that the dumbest thing to do is to pretend that anyone knows what Donald Trump is going to decide.
True.
He told us in the lead up to him making this decision, he may or he may not do it. He doesn't know. Nobody knows. And in fact, he makes his final decision in the last seconds. So I think this was a decision that was a balanced one in his own mind. Part of it would have been the Israelis have given the Americans a unique opportunity to do these strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities by destroying a lot of Iranian air defense. And there was a conflict underway of which this is now a part.
So where's it go from here? What does Iran do you think?
Well, Iran has some options about what they do. We've heard fiery rhetoric coming out of the Iranian leadership, the remaining Iranian leadership, about the terrible things they will do. In fact, we heard about the terrible things they would do to the Israelis and the Americans if these strikes happened. But there's a real problem with Iran responding coherently and rapidly, and that is they're in the middle of this conflict with Israel, and Israel has hammered the Iranian leadership, particularly the military leadership, and degraded the Iranian military capacity. So that's why far fewer ballistic missiles are raining down on Israel than Iran had planned. But given all that, and even though Iran's supreme leader is hiding out in a bunker without any electronics, make it hard for him to give orders and understand what's going on, Iran could follow through on threats to attack US bases and military personnel in the Middle East. There are about 19 different American facilities, including a big naval base in Bahrain and a big air base in the UAE. So there are things they can do. They could follow through on threats to damage regional oil production and close the Straits of Hormuz, through which about 20% of the world's energy passes every day.
Do you think this is the beginning? I mean, notwithstanding everything you've just said, do you think this is the beginning of a long, drawn-out conflict? Or, given the damage that's already been done to Iran, do you think it'll come to a head sooner rather than later?
Well, I think people are making a mistake in not understanding this conflict between Israel and Iran that's now been joined at least partly by America began as an active war with the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October 2023, because Hamas originally thought attacking Israel would bring Iran and Iran's other powerful violent proxy, Hezbollah, in Lebanon into the fight. That didn't happen, but Hamas did what it did, partly because it had been armed, trained, and equipped by Iran. And we've seen the Israelis dismantle Hamas, that's now a fraction of itself and operating out of the rubble of Gaza, dismantle Hezbollah, with Lebanon and Hezbollah saying they're going to stay out of this fight, and now dismantling the Iranian military capability and nuclear program itself. So it's a conflict that's been going on since then. This is the next phase. But I don't expect, people talk about escalation. I cannot see another Middle Eastern state that wants to join in this war and that wants to side with Iran. They want it to go away.
Stay with me, Michael. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Michael Shoebridge, founder and director of defence and security think tank Strategic Analysis Australia. Let's move away from the Middle East. Last week, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was due to meet with the US president on the sidelines of the G7. Didn't happen. In hindsight, given what the president was working on at the time, is that understandable? Is it unfortunate that we didn't know more about it?
Well, this is interesting. So we're now 6 months into Trump's second term. Anthony Albanese has been Australia's Prime Minister that whole time, and he still hasn't managed to get a face-to-face meeting with Donald Trump. It was meant to happen, as you say, in the sidelines of a bigger meeting, the G7, but Trump flew out of that meeting early to get back to Washington and make the decision we've just been talking about. The real problem here is Mr. Albanese hasn't prioritized a meeting with Donald Trump, and he's relied on catching up with him in a side meeting at something else they're both going to. In contrast, he's had 3 meetings since he became Prime Minister with China's Xi Jinping, and last month he announced he was flying to Beijing shortly to have yet another face-to-face meeting with Xi. And that contrast isn't just obvious here in Australia and in Beijing, it's obvious in Washington, because Mr. Albanese has told us ad nauseum how important direct leader-to-leader meetings are. When it comes to China, he just seems to not make it a priority with our major security partner, America.
So what's at risk here? Is AUKUS really at risk?
Well, yes, it is. I think there'll be a lot of breathlessness about the Pentagon review, which is a 30-day review, apparently, although Trump has a history of extending these timelines. But let's say that the Pentagon doesn't recommend cancelling AUKUS with this review. That's not the end of the story. The bigger problem is AUKUS, this nuclear submarine deal, came about because America, the UK, and Australia were agreed that we needed to do more to deter China from engaging in conflict. And this cooperation around nuclear submarines was seen as a core way of doing that. If Washington sees that our Prime Minister is more interested in his relationship with Beijing than Washington, and adds to that the Albanese government is chronically underinvesting in our own security, bumping along at 2%, when America wants its NATO allies to be at 3.5%, and the same here in our part of the world. Putting those two things together, the Americans could say, AUKUS isn't making sense because we don't have a shared mission of deterring China with our Australian allies. Why then should we give them submarines we don't have enough of themselves? And that's something that will play out after this 30 days of this short review.
So how do you think Anthony Albanese should play this?
I think he's got to work out in his own mind what's important around Australia's security and how to manage our economic dependence on China and our growing security dependence on America. Because while we're underinvesting in our own defense, we're buying even more American weapons and systems. So we're becoming less powerful, but more dependent on American power, just when we look like we're less aligned with Washington. The thing I think needs to happen in Canberra is we need to adjust to the new world that we're in, one of exertion of naked power, both by China and America, and think about Israel and Russia and Ukraine. And the simple answer for Australia is this is the wrong time to be doubling down on our economic dependence on China right when we're doubling down on our security dependence on America. Each of those things doesn't make sense by itself, but put together look uniquely stupid.
Okay. It's a very difficult line to walk, though, as a country like Australia, and I'm not criticising or I'm neither for nor against what the Prime Minister is doing, but whoever you are in a world where there's naked aggression, it's kind of new rules. It must be very hard to know exactly what to do.
Well, step one is to realise the rules have changed and not keep pining for the fjords. So that would be a good thing, and it's fairly obvious that the rules have changed. That's why we've got two active wars, one in Europe and one in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. So realising that things have changed is actually the job of governments. And yes, this is a difficult environment for Australia, but the Prime Minister and the government have been telling Australians that it's a difficult and dangerous environment for some time now. Their actions just haven't matched their words. And I'll say one thing about this diversification from our growing economic dependence on China, which is Australia is the most economically dependent on China out of all the countries in the OECD. So we don't really have to be anything other than just not lazy to reduce that dependence. It's been possible for all those other countries. And we should, if we want to be more independent of America, we need to invest more in our own defence, and we need to wean ourselves off our almost entire dependence on American technology and weapons. And that's possible.
Michael, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean.
That was Michael Shoebridge, founder and director of defence and security think tank Strategic Analysis Australia. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, business news you can use. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.